I spent 9 years of my career and 12,000 coaching hours refining how to actually help people heal. And I want to just give you the technique for free today. So the first thing I want to share is that in the past 9 years, we've had about 650 clients. The typical client that we have will experience at least a 75% reduction in either anxiety, depression, or both, typically within about 90 days. Now, everyone's a little different, right? And not everyone gets that exact same result, but it's very typical for us to make that happen. In many cases, I don't have an exact percentage, but a very substantial portion of the clients that we have report a full anxiety and depression elimination within 90 days. Not everybody, but many of them do. And the thing I want to just point out is that I rarely run into situations that surprise me anymore. Okay, when people are dealing with trauma, when people are talking about wanting to actually heal, when people are describing their past experiences and they need help processing through them, it's been years since I've run into a situation that has been actually unique and novel. And the reason I share that with you is I want you to understand that what is most local is most global, right? And what that means is that whatever you're dealing with right now, whatever sort of healing you're trying to get through, whatever your previous experience was that either made you feel traumatized or damaged or broken or just simply anxious and upset or imbalanced, whatever your language is to describe it, right? Whatever brought you here, I want you to understand that it is exceptionally likely that I've seen not just one or two, but dozens, if not hundreds of situations very, very similar, if not virtually identical to your situation. Okay, just to give you kind of some roundabout understandings, the majority of my clients are women, about 60%, 60 to 65%. Many of them are survivors of either sexual abuse, physical abuse, or both. Many of my male clients are also victims of sexual or physical abuse of some kind. And even beyond the people who were, sexually or physically abused, many of the people who report needing to heal, the majority of the people who report needing to heal, are the people who maybe were not necessarily harmed physically, but they do feel that they were substantially harmed emotionally. Like I said, it's just been a year since I've run into a situation where I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I've never seen this happen. I have helped people heal from the most extreme, crazy, bizarre things that I honestly don't even want to repeat, but I just, for the most extreme, heinous acts that a human being is capable of doing to another human being, I've helped somebody mentally and emotionally process that. Okay, whether it's, I had one woman I remember who was a victim of a literal kidnapping. She was literally locked in a basement for almost 2 weeks, right? Her family and everybody thought that she was dead. It was a horrific experience, right? She didn't think she was going to see the light of day, right? That extreme level. People who are war and army veterans, okay? People who have seen all sorts of acts of violence and untold issues in front of them. So whatever brought you here, whatever, emotional pain you're experiencing, I want you to know that you are in a place where what I'm about to share with you is going to be very relevant. It's going to be very useful, but you got to stick with this because no one out there online, I promise you, no one out there is teaching what I teach when it comes to actually doing this. There's a lot of misinformation when it comes to the healing process and what is actually needed to make that occur. And we're here to set the record straight this evening. I'm here to give you the real talk. I'm here to tell you what you need to hear. Maybe not necessarily what you want to hear. Maybe not necessarily the information that's the most comforting, but it is going to be the information that you need if you're really, really serious about moving on, processing the past, truly letting go, and actually being able to feel like you're in control of your life again. If that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. Okay, so let's go ahead and dig into it. I want to briefly revisit one framework we talk about a little bit in detail, but we're going to attack it from a different angle today. If you're new to my world, welcome. This will be a foundational piece of information. If you've been with me for a while, this will be a helpful, healthy reminder of some key information. And it's what we call the thought cycle. So if you feel a need for healing, here's what I can do. I can make a couple educated guesses. The first is you are experiencing some unwanted, unpleasant emotions or feelings. Okay. And you don't need to share the details of your past experience that made you feel, traumatized or whatever. If you don't want to, you're welcome to in the comments, but at least let me know in the comments, what is the core emotion or feeling that you experience. If you feel a need for healing, it's usually either anxiety, depression, guilt, or shame. Those are the four most common, and they are not mutually exclusive. Very often they go hand in hand. If you're here to get rid of one of those feelings, the thing you have to understand is that the feeling in and of itself cannot be worked on directly. In other words, yes, we can, use, say, like medication or meditation or breathing exercises or grounding techniques. All of those might temporarily make you feel a little bit better, but they're not getting anywhere near the source of the problem. And the reason why they're not getting at the source of the problem is because there's something that happens before your emotions or your feelings. Your emotions or your feelings are step 2 of a 4-step process. What comes before them are your beliefs and your thoughts. Most importantly for today's session, your beliefs, okay, subconscious beliefs. So for example, if I believe I am not good enough, if that is a core belief I have, then that is going to then therefore generate a series of feelings. It might make me feel a lack of confidence. It might make me feel shy. It might make me feel sensitive. Okay, for example, if I have a belief that says that something was taken from me, something was robbed from me, that belief is going to create a series of feelings such as anger or desperation of some kind. So behind every negative feeling, there is some sort of a limiting belief of some sort. And those limiting beliefs emerge, they become created in response to emotionally significant events. Okay. And most people typically use the word trauma. I use the word trauma very selectively because trauma in and of itself is a word that is emotionally charged. Once we put the label of trauma onto something, we tend to now exacerbate and enlarge the emotional significance that it has. And people think that you either have to call it trauma, or if you don't call it trauma, then you're diminishing someone's experience. I don't agree with that. What I agree is you have to be very selective and intentional with the language that you're using. But I digress. Let's get back to the core framework. So there's a key belief or beliefs. Those beliefs then generate feelings. Those feelings generate actions. Those actions generate results. Those results then reinforce certain beliefs. That is the thought cycle. So if you're here consuming this information, more than likely you are caught in one or more of those thought cycles. It's just that you don't yet have the level of awareness needed to actually break out of that. And if you feel like you need to heal, the way that we want to make sure that we do that is we have to go to the direct source of the problem. Okay, we can't keep doing these sort of surface level coping techniques. It's not going to be satisfactory for you. If we want to make sure that we actually get to the source of the problem, that means we have to start identifying each of the limiting beliefs that are causing those feelings. So that's what we're going to be putting our focus on. Now, to get that more specific, let me give you a metaphor to help you understand why this is so important. If I have that belief, let's say that core belief is I am not good enough, and I created that belief in response to, I'll use my own personal experience and story here. So my stepfather was never physically abusive to me. A lot of people would very easily categorize how he was growing up as substantially verbally, mentally, and emotionally abusive. I choose not to put that label on it anymore. But at the time, his actions, his behaviors, his sort of messages toward me, the things that he would say, the things that he would do, very much triggered the creation of a belief for me. And the belief that I sort of chose subconsciously to create was I am not enough. So whatever your core belief is, I'll show you what the 3 most common are that create a need for healing in a second. But whatever your belief is, I want you to imagine that that core belief is like the trunk of a tree. And from the trunk of that tree, in my example, it's I am not good enough, or it was I am not good enough. From the trunk of that tree, countless branches emerge. The branches are the thoughts, okay, the intrusive thoughts, the negative thoughts, the anxious thoughts. So if I believe I'm not good enough, I might have all sorts of intrusive anxious thoughts like, they don't want to spend time with me, they don't want to be my friend, my boss doesn't like me, I'm never going to do good enough, whatever. There will be a multitude of different thoughts. And so what most people do is they resort to coping mechanisms or distractions. And the way that they are trying to use coping mechanisms or distractions is basically like tree trimmers, where you're trying to minimize the size of the tree. You're trying to basically just make sure that those intrusive thoughts don't continue to take up more space. But the problem is when you go that route, you're never drilling down into the core problem. Taking care of one anxiety causing belief is worth, tackling 10 or 20 anxiety induced thoughts. Okay. So we got to get down to those beliefs. Now, what are the three most common beliefs that cause the necessity for healing? Well, we like to abbreviate them as the 3 P's. Okay. So the first one is the belief of permanence. The delusion of permanence is another way of thinking about this. So when we believe that something is permanent, this will create the need for healing. And this tends to create the experience that most people label as PTSD. When people put the label of PTSD on something, what they're basically saying is something emotionally significant happened in my past, and I have created a series of subconscious beliefs in response to that significant emotional event. I don't know exactly what those subconscious beliefs are, but those subconscious beliefs cause me to feel limited. They cause me to feel potentially inadequate. They cause me to feel potentially fearful. They cause me to feel that there are certain things that are not available to me. And because, therefore, it feels that that event occurred and then all of a sudden my life was limited, I now am going to blame the event as being the source of the limitation. Okay, and what you want to start to understand is that the emotionally significant event was not the truest source of the problem. It was simply the cause of the problem. There's a difference between the cause and the source. Okay, so the emotionally significant event occurred, and that was basically the cause, or the trigger might be a different word if you prefer. That might help you understand what the distinction better. The source of the problem, however, was the belief that was created in response to the emotionally significant event. So for example, speaking from my own experience, right, my stepfather he was diagnosed with all sorts of things. I'm pretty sure bipolar, mania, all sorts of stuff, right? But he was very erratic. His moods could change very rapidly. I love the man to death, and our relationship is the best it's ever been. And I've already done all the healing I need to do on that. I feel plenty of closure. It does not affect me anymore, but it did for a very long time. And the reason it affected me was because he would act a certain way around me. And yes, that was the trigger. That was the cause. I blamed him. I was angry at him. I was so upset with him for so long. But what I kind of came to realize was that the more angry I was at him and the more I blamed him for making me the way that I thought he had made me, the more I was unintentionally convincing myself that he was the one in charge of my life instead of me. And what I came to realize was he was actually the trigger. He was the cause. He was the initiating agent, but he was not the true source of the pain. The source of the pain was that I believed that I was not good enough. It wasn't necessarily the things that he said or did that suggested that I was not good enough. It was me believing that I was not good enough. Now, of course, I was a child. It wasn't my fault, right? And I'm here to tell you, by the way, too, like if you were a child and that happened to you, it wasn't your fault that you came to believe whatever message you felt was being signaled to you, if that's what the source of the pain was for you. I know for many of you who feel like you need to heal, I'm relating to you right now. Like I know that for many of you, this is exactly the same type of thing that happened. Somebody was communicating some kind of a message verbally or implicitly, and that message may have been, you're not enough, some version of you're not enough. And what I'm here to tell you is that that was certainly the cause of the trauma, but the true source of the trauma was that you came to believe what they were saying to you. See, somebody else's opinion of you does not have any power over you unless you actually believe that it is true. I want you to let that sink in for a second. So whatever blame that you're actually giving to your dad, your mom, your brother, your sister, whomever it is that you felt like you can't let go of in order to heal, part of you has believed that what they said was true, or you thought that what they said was total and complete bullshit, but you have believed that you needed their approval in order to be good enough. And both of those are examples of you unintentionally doing a process that we call giving your power away. You convincing yourself that your ability to feel whole, complete, your ability to feel empowered lies with them, not with you. And that is a fiction, and that's a delusion. And that belief has to be overcome. So I'm veering a little off track here, so let me get back onto the subject at hand. When we go to the 3 Ps, the first belief type that will cause an experience of prolonged pain or trauma is the belief of permanence. When we basically create a belief that says, because this happened over here, I'm now like this forever. Because this thing happened when I was 8 years old, I'm now destined to be this way. And what I want you to understand is, your physical body replaces itself every 7 years. There's not a single molecule or cell in your body that is the same as the one that went through that trauma from however long ago. There just isn't. So the only reason why the feeling persists, right, throughout 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, is because you're operating from the same beliefs. You created a key subconscious belief or more back then, and you've held on to that belief even though you're not even remotely close to the same person physically. So what we have to do is we have to upgrade the belief system. We have to recognize that there is the experience that happens, and then there is the layer of meaning, the layer of belief that we put onto it, and the beliefs are the things that cause us to experience that prolonged inability to heal. The first type of belief is that it's permanent. If you believe that it's permanent, how in the world are you ever going to solve it? If you only define your problem in unsolvable terms, that's the surest way to make sure that you stay stuck. So we got to get rid of that idea of permanence. The second belief is the belief of pervasiveness. So very often what we believe is because XYZ happened, my whole life is ruined. So, or for example, because I got fired, my whole life is over. Because I just went through a breakup, I'm never going to love again. Because my dad was an a-hole, I'm never going to be able to have a good relationship with men or whatever, right? These types of belief systems are very, very common, where the human mind loves to generalize. The human mind loves to create a shortcut, even when that shortcut shortchanges you. And this is one of the fastest ways to feel shortchanged. So rather than us saying my whole thing, my whole life is ruined because of this one thing, what we want to do is we want to get in the habit of a leader, right? If you really truly want to have the type of mental health that you deserve, if you really want to have daily peace of mind, you've got to be a leader in your mental health. And the way that we become a leader is you have to learn how to call it like it is, but no worse than it is, right? Call it like it is, right? And if we're calling it like it is, there are some beliefs that need to be processed. There is some stuff maybe from your past that we need to do a little inner work on, right? Maybe there's some things you need to take responsibility for. Like I said before, it's not your fault you created those negative beliefs, but it is absolutely your responsibility to do something about it, to change it now, if you want to break the cycle. So we will got to make sure that we're calling it like it is, not worse than it is. And that means not defining it as pervasive, not saying because this one thing happened, all of these things are going badly. And then the third, probably the most common and probably the most powerful of the 3 Ps, the 3 types of beliefs that inhibit healing, is the belief of it being personal, right? So the belief that it is your fault. Okay, so if you remember that like iconic scene from Good Will Hunting, right, where Robin Williams is talking to Matt Damon's character at the end, Will Hunting, obviously, and Will had gone through so much trauma, and the big breakthrough line is, "It is not your fault." And the thing that I have found is that this is the most common belief that people create in response to a significant emotional event in the past that they need to heal from. There is some level of blame that they are ascribing. 9 times out of 10, they're blaming themselves. And then 10% of the time, they're directing that blame externally towards someone else in a very vicious manner. But really, they're doing that to basically not engage in that process actively of blaming themselves, which they still do at a subconscious level. And so I'm going to be walking you through how to move through the blame process today. And there's a little mantra that you might want to remember. It certainly helped me move on past the issues with my stepfather. The mantra that I used was, "It's not about me." And when I used that, what I basically came to realize when I was in the middle of that experience, when my stepfather was acting the way he was, I believed it was personal. I believed I wasn't enough. And therefore I felt all sorts of anger and upset and rage even. And then as I grew up and I started to work on these mental tools, what I basically came to believe and understand is that he is the way that he is, or he was the way that he was. He's changed a lot, but he was the way that he was because he had a very serious, substantial set of challenges in his own childhood background. And so even though I was sort of in his crosshairs from time to time, the core pattern that he was running was really just a protective pattern he had developed a long time ago. So I was, again, the trigger for his pattern, not the cause of the pattern, right? And so he had his own issues that he needed to deal with. And that's one of the first things I would recommend for all of you to understand is whoever it is that you feel a sense of blame towards, they were going through something that you didn't see. They went through a set of experiences that you will probably never fully understand. What they were doing at that time was the best that they could come up with at that time. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't give them a blank check. It doesn't mean, that you aren't allowed to, feel a little sad about it. It just means that we are not going to help the entire system, and we're certainly not going to help ourselves by holding a grudge. So let's move on. Okay, I want to introduce to you a new idea, a new way of taking a look at yourself, a new way of looking at your thoughts, your beliefs, your identity even. And I like to call it bundle theory. Now this little moniker, this name bundle theory, I didn't come up with. It technically is a philosophy concept. But I find it to be very simple. I find it to be also very freeing and a very useful thing. And so basically, if you imagine, say, like a bundle of twigs, you could think of yourself as a bundle of twigs rather than like an immovable, like fixed pipe, let's say, or some sort of physical object. I'm just thinking of a pipe because a bundle of twigs looks like a pipe. But a pipe is permanent and unchanging, whereas a bundle is very changeable, right? So most people have a significant emotional event. They create that idea that it's permanent, it's pervasive, it's personal. They lock themselves into this idea that this is how it's going to be, right? That they're just not good enough, they never will be good enough, or whatever key belief is that they created. And instead, what I want to encourage you to do is to think of yourself as a bundle. And when I say a bundle of twigs, what do the twigs represent? Well, first of all, if we look at just a physical level, like I was talking about before, you are a bundle, right? There is like no one permanent thing that makes you you. Like even as you're listening to this, even as you're watching this, born and replacing themselves over and over and over again, right as we're talking right now, you will be a different bundle. You will be a different physical entity tomorrow than you are today by a substantial margin. So just operating from that standpoint, you are always in a constant state of flux. You are always in a constant state of change. But there are parts of our experience as a human being that we tend to identify with in a more permanent way. We believe are not changeable when they actually are very changeable. And that includes, number one, the thoughts that we think. So many of you know I've cited this before, but studies have found that the average human being will have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, but 80 to 90% of those thoughts are the same day by day. And what most people have no clue about is that there's all sorts of research that points to the fact that you can retrain your brain to think differently. So most people who are feeling anxious, depressed, angry, upset, whatever your particular flavor of suffering is, whatever that emotional center of gravity is that you're feeling that way because you have the same habitual thoughts day by day. And you're having the same habitual thoughts because you're holding on to the same habitual beliefs, right? Remember, the belief is the tree trunk, the thoughts are the branches. And then remember the thought cycle, right? So we have thoughts and beliefs that lead to feelings, feelings lead to actions, actions lead to results. So if we want to change how we feel, what we've got to understand is that there is a current bundle that makes us who we are. Like if you zoom out a little bit, you can see that there are chapters of your life where you are more in pain, and then there are chapters of your life where you are more at peace. And if you think about what was different between the time when you were more in pain and the time when you were more at peace, you were thinking different thoughts. I promise you that. I guarantee it. I stake my entire reputation on it. You had different habitual thoughts going on during that more peaceful period. Now, you may have kind of changed your bundle subconsciously. You may not have been consciously designing the changes that you make in your bundle, but I guarantee you the bundle changed. You let go of certain thoughts, and then other thoughts started to come into your bundle, and therefore the entire quality of your life changed. So you have the ability to change the habitual thoughts you have. That's number one. Number two, what makes you in a very real way is the collection of beliefs that you have created up until now. So for example, like you have all sorts of different beliefs. One of the types of beliefs that's really important are your values. Many of you who experience anxiety on a regular basis feel anxiety because you want a very, very high amount of certainty. Okay, let me know in the comments if you can relate to that. If I were to say to you, hey, let's go do this thing this weekend, it's very uncertain. It's, not a guarantee it's going to be safe, but it's going to be so much fun. Right? Many of you would say no to that because what you value high up on your list is certainty. It's a priority for you. And at different stages of your life, you have valued different things at different priorities. And so say like one example would be like if you're a parent, all of the parents will understand this intuitively. If you're a parent, you had a whole series of things that were very important to you before you became a parent, that as soon as you knew you were going to become a parent, they were not important to you anymore. And then as soon as you became a parent, there were things that were never important to you that now all of a sudden were important to you. Do you get what I mean by that? So as you were going through your life, your bundle changed. You let go of things that maybe before meant the whole world to you. Right? Maybe before you were telling yourself a story of, I could never leave this, or I could never stop this, or I could never move out of this town, or I could never stop doing this hobby that I do. But then as soon as you became a parent, you created a new set of beliefs. And that new set of beliefs and values said, no, that's not as important anymore. Now I'm incorporating new things into my bundle. Now these things are more important to me. And so you have the ability to change your values. You have the ability to change your beliefs. But we forget that we know that we can do that. We forget that it's possible to make that happen. Number 3, you can change your habits. In fact, you change your habits a lot. Maybe not as much as you'd like, but I guarantee if you think about 10 years ago, there are some things you might still do from 10 years ago, but there are some things that you definitely don't do anymore, right? And so sometimes, again, we let habits out of our bundle and we bring habits in. And if we become more conscious and intentional about how to do this, it makes the process of letting go so much easier. And you're going to see this comes back to healing in just a second. Because if we really want to heal, right, what healing really comes down to at the essence of it is letting go, right? And many of you are having a tough time letting go. And I'm trying to remind you that letting go is something you do a lot of the time. It's something you've done more times than you could possibly count in your life. It's just that for some things, you're currently refusing to let go, or you believe that you can't let go, or that you believe that you shouldn't let go. One of those beliefs. And I want you to remember, if you don't have what you want in your life, it's because you have at least one limiting belief in the way. So you've got at least one belief that's causing you to hold on to that pain, to hold on to that belief that you created in response to that significant emotional event or series of events, and you haven't let it go up until now, but you absolutely have the ability to do that. Another thing you change a lot, well, maybe not a lot, but you've certainly changed it throughout your life, is your environment. Okay, both your physical environment, your social environment, your like what you put into your body, that's a part of your environment. You can change that. That's a part of your bundle. Your relationships, you certainly let go of certain relationships throughout your life and then embraced new ones. We talked about values. Another one would be your rules. Rules are another thing that you have the ability to let go of and then recreate anew. Rules are basically your expectations or your shoulds. This person should do this. I'm working with a woman right now, and the number one thing that has helped her, she came into the program a couple months ago. Number one thing that was bothering her was she was very reactive to her spouse, her partner. And what we basically worked on above all else was identifying and then letting go of her old rules. And she had a shit ton of rules for her husband, her kids, but more importantly, herself. And the more rules you have, the more unwinnable your game of life is. The more unwinnable your game of life is, the more reactive you get towards other people. So we let go of some of her rules out of her bundle, and now we've replaced them with internal rules that she can actually abide by and achieve on a regular basis. And so all of these come to this kind of one conclusion, right? There's this one key thing I'm just trying to communicate to you right now before we move on and before I get into the real nitty gritty of how do you do this healing process, right? Because like right now you're probably thinking, okay, this all sounds good. I would love to let things go and incorporate new things. The reason I've spent so much time on this part so far is because you're never going to let go unless you recognize that letting go is something you already do. Because for many of you, the number one belief that's kept you from letting go is the belief that you can't, right? And as Henry Ford said, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, either way, you're right. Right? So what I want to remind you of is encapsulated really beautifully in this one quote by a guy who was a lot smarter than me, Lao Tzu. And he said, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Right? So again, you've got a bundle right now. That bundle of yours has changed throughout the years, but there's parts of it that are causing you pain that you haven't let go of yet. When you let let go of those, you now create an opening, you create a space, you create the opportunity for something new to occur, to be welcomed into the fold. So just understanding it's a possibility is the first step. Now let's get into a couple tactics. This is the part that is actually simpler than you might think it is. People like to make the idea of healing very complicated. People like to talk about it as if it has to take decades. And I'm here to tell you it doesn't. Okay, like I shared with you before, the typical turnaround time that we have with a client is 3 months or less. And it's not 3 months because we just want to get rid of them and kick them out and say, hey, tough luck, go get help elsewhere. It's 3 months because 3 months is what it takes. That's how long it takes. It does take a little time. And don't get me wrong. I mean, we're doing things very differently in those 3 months than what you're used to with like therapy or something like that. Like we're hitting it hard. We're giving you real skills, real systems. We're doing the work. We're not wasting time just sitting around talking. But it does take a little time, but it doesn't have to take forever. You just have to get to the source of the problem. And then what you have to start to do is you have to elevate your standards. And when I say elevate your standards, what I mean is you have to draw a new line in the sand around what you are willing to tolerate and what you are not willing to tolerate. Okay, because what the thing is that if you've been having a difficult time letting something go, I need you to understand that you are currently tolerating not letting it go. I know that sounds weird, but I want you to understand this. 2 things, 2 key beliefs. Number 1, you don't get the mental health you want. You get the mental health you tolerate. Okay. Number 2, if you are not letting go of something from the past, it's because you are tolerating not letting it go. Okay. It doesn't mean you want to not let it go. It means you are tolerating not letting it go. You are tolerating whatever this thing is from the past taking up some amount of space for you in your head still. And I'm telling you this because, like I shared earlier, this may not be what you want to hear, but it's the truth. There are people I've worked with, there are clients I've worked with where as soon as they finally got absolutely honest with themselves about the true cost that they were incurring for themselves, that they were putting onto their spouse, that they were putting onto their kids by continuing to ruminate and cycle through what had happened in their past, once they really became aware of the emotional impact that was having on their family system, even without me giving them much of the skills I'm going to give you today and the steps, just them realizing, okay, screw this, I'm not going to let that take up space in my head anymore. That in and of itself can very often be the one thing that then creates the healing process, because ultimately you have to decide how much focus are you willing to tolerate giving something? How much energy are you willing to tolerate giving something? How much power of yours are you willing to tolerate giving away and creating a belief that says, well, I just have fewer options than I'd like to have because this thing happened over here, right? You have to decide to draw that new line for yourself, and we all do. And that was one of the things that enabled me to be here talking to you well over a decade later, still anxiety-free, still depression-free, no therapy, no medication, no coping mechanisms, even though I was hospitalized, suicidal to the point that I thought I was going to be anxious and depressed forever. And the big thing that changed was I drew a line in the sand and I said, I'm not willing to tolerate the pain of the past continuing to prolong itself and carry itself forward into the future anymore. I'm just not going to do that. And then I learned some skills and techniques to make that a little easier and a little more elegant, but that internal standard was the key thing. So what I want you to do is there's a couple magic words you want to write down and remember. You can type them in the comments to kind of cement them in your brain. I refuse to let this control me anymore. That's what you want to write down. I refuse to let this control me anymore. Notice that this is very different than I don't want this to control me anymore, or I wish it didn't control me anymore. It's I refuse. Very, very, very big difference as soon as we say that. So that's the first thing. We got to draw a line in the sand and have a standard. And to actually do the healing process, we've got to do that, number one. Okay, we have to decide that we're going to refuse to allow this to fester, to hold us back anymore. That's step number one. Step number two, to actually heal, do what people call healing, what you really have to do is you have to derive an empowering meaning from the pain. So here's what that means. What that means is you have to find the hidden gifts in the pain that occurred in the past. And you might think to yourself, Ty, there are absolutely no hidden gifts to what happened to me. What happened to me was atrocious. It was horrific. I would never wish somebody to go through it again. There was no gifts. How in the world are you saying there was a gift from this? And what I'm here to tell you is that's not true. What I'm here to tell you is, having seen it all, having seen as extreme of situations as a woman being kidnapped for almost 2 weeks, having her life threatened, and still being able to overcome the trauma of that. Okay, people overcoming sexual abuse, physical abuse, the trauma from emotional and verbal abuse. I'm here to tell you there is always a hidden gift. And the hidden gift is the characteristics and traits that it created for you. This is usually what the gift is. Number one, it can be the characteristics it created for you. And many of those characteristics and traits are just simply typically the opposite of the person that caused the pain for you, what they embodied. So for example, I remember I had a gentleman a couple of years ago. He had been holding on to trauma and this feeling of feeling inadequate for 40 years. I mean, he was in his 60s. And it was still a problem for him. And I don't remember all the specifics of his situation, but I know at least one of his parents was definitely not nice, to put it very lightly. And he had held on to that for a really long time. And this client of mine had 4 kids of his own. And I said, what are some of the beliefs that you created in response to your father? It's coming back to me. I'm remembering it was his father. What are some of the beliefs that you created in response to your father treating you that way? And, he started with the painful ones, like I'm not enough, I'll never be enough, etc. And then I said, gotcha. What kind of values do you ascribe to as a father? Like, what sort of key beliefs do you have and do you hold close to your heart as a father? And he said, oh, well, I value compassion, I value understanding, I value closeness, I value quality time. And I said, gotcha. And from what you've told me, you have a really amazing family life. Like, you and your kids are really close, and, you've got a great relationship with your wife, and, maybe these other things in your life are not going so great, but your family seems to be amazing, right? Like, your family life is great. He said, yes, absolutely. And I said, gotcha. Do you think that you would be half the father you are if your father wasn't such a piece of shit? And he thought for a second, and he paused, and he realized that the answer was no, right? Because he didn't really come to value compassion. He wouldn't have come to value compassion, I should say, had he not grown up feeling what it was like to go without it as a child. He would not have been present and there for his kids as much as he was had he not felt the pain of what it was like growing up without it. And so what I told him is, if we're going to blame your dad for causing this trauma for you, that's fine. But we also have to make sure we blame your dad for the fantastic relationships you have with your 4 kids. In other words, we have to blame effectively. We have to blame fully. And many of you are experiencing trauma and you're not feeling the healing. And the reason you're not healing is because you've failed to blame effectively. You've only blamed for the pain that was caused or triggered. You've only blamed for what you felt was taken from you. But what you haven't blamed for is the muscle that it created for you, or the perspective it created for you, or the values it helped you create, or the alignment in terms of what is truly most important, or the resilience, or the independence that it created for you, or just simply the sheer emotional strength that it created for you. And what I'm inviting you to do is to actually start to blame effectively. Because if you do this, what you'll realize is no matter how painful something was in the past, there was always a way in which it was serving you. There was always a way in which you could derive an empowering meaning from the circumstances. Many of you guys know that I sometimes talk about this one story in this one book. The book is called Man's Search for Meaning. Fantastic book. And it's written by Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish psychiatrist during World War II in Nazi Germany. He was put in a prison camp. I think it was Auschwitz. I don't remember exactly. But what he noticed is there were 2 types of prisoners. There were prisoners who basically gave up right away, regardless of their age, and they typically died very quick, within a matter of days or weeks. Versus the other type of prisoner that, mostly regardless of their age, they were more survivors. They lasted longer, right? And many of them actually lived to see the escape from some of the camps. And what he figured out, what he realized was, the ones who survived, the ones who had a survivor's mentality, they put some version of an empowering meaning around their circumstances. So everyone was in the same horrific circumstances, probably the most traumatic set of circumstances a human being could live through, right? So the circumstances were the same for everybody, but there was very different meanings, very different belief systems. The ones that survived, the ones that, made it out, used beliefs like, I must get out, I have to get back to my family, I have to make sure that there's more to life after this, I have to make sure this never happens to any other human being ever again. For many of them, it was like a sort of vengeful thing at first, but they had some sort of meaning, whereas the first group, the people who died right away, the belief set that they had was, it's all over, God's punishing me, why is this happening to me? And basically they had the set of beliefs that just only put the disempowering meaning around it. And I share that story with you to help you understand that the human soul is something that can survive hell on earth so long as you are being intelligent with the meaning that you give things. And if you're being very selective with the meaning that you give things, and you're only putting the negative, disempowering meaning around things, you are vastly shortchanging yourself. Vastly. I have seen people do this blaming effectively thing, where they sit down and they really ask themselves sincerely, what are all of the good things that came because of this painful event in the past? Number two, what are all of the fantastic characteristics and traits that I developed in response to this painful event of the past? And then number three, what are all the good things I have in my life that I would not have had that event not occurred? Fourth and finally, if I would have gotten everything that I wanted back then, would my life really be better now? That's a really important question to ask yourself, because in the vast majority of cases, it's not. Even when I look back on my own experience, if my stepfather was, if he was just nice to me all of the time, I would have never gone through the journey that I went through to learn the skills that I learned, and now I wouldn't have the privilege to be able to be here with you and be changing lives every single day of my life, right? My life would not be better had it been easier back then. And that's the thing that you got to understand, is that getting what we want is not always getting what we need. In fact, rarely is getting what we want getting what we need. And if you start this blaming effectively process, you'll start to heal very quickly, because you'll start to realize, oh, I don't need to hold a grudge anymore, because actually I got the better end of the deal. It's just I've convinced myself and believed I didn't, because I was only selectively focused on what was painful about the experience. And I have, up until now, created a giant blind spot where I failed to realize all of the gifts that occurred because of that painful experience. So that's step number two. Okay, you got to derive an empowering meaning and blame effectively. Okay, and by the way, one person you might need to blame effectively with is yourself, because you've maybe been blaming yourself in a negative standpoint over and over again, holding a grudge over and over. And what you need to be able to do is say, well, maybe what I did for a good intent. One thing I can tell you for sure, every single thing a human being does, there is some positive intention behind that. Even the most malicious, ugly, nasty things on the surface, there is some mechanism underneath it that has some form of good intention. The most nasty, ugly, evil-like things, usually the good intention is simply self-preservation, right? Or, survival of some kind. That's usually when we're acting our nastiest, is when we're in survival mode. But that in and of itself has a good intention behind it. So if you can start to figure out what that good intention was that drove you back then, and if you start to realize what all the good things were that unintentionally came from it, that's going to go a whole hell of a long way towards healing. Deriving an empowering meaning and deciding that you're going to derive an empowering meaning despite the painful circumstances, especially during painful circumstances, that is one of the things that makes you unfuckwithable. That is one of the things that makes you bulletproof. That is one of the things that makes you incredibly emotionally fit. That is what enables you to feel truly empowered and confident every day. Because instead of believing, I'm never going to feel whole because this person or this thing way over here did this over here, instead you bring that power back and you say, no. I recognize the gifts. I recognize what came out of that. Or I'm going to find a way to make that really painful situation and turn it into my advantage. Even if the advantage is just, I am never going to be a father like that, which it was for that client that I told you about before. So let's move on. The third step is you must give love where it was previously withheld. In fact, I often cite these two as the chief principal elements of healing, as in we must derive an empowering meaning, and we must decide to love where we were previously withholding love. If you are experiencing any emotional pain, it is because there is an area of your life where you are currently withholding love, either from yourself or from someone else. And the very first place we want to start, of course, is going to be with yourself. That starts with acknowledging it wasn't your fault, whatever it was that happened, but it is your responsibility to make sure that you take ownership over your patterns, your mentality, your emotions, and that you change it today. Okay, that is a really critical piece. And yes, what I'm also inviting you to do, even though you may have convinced yourself you either can't do it or you won't do it, is yes, it is actually possible to extend love to the people who caused pain to you in the past. And what I'm going to invite you to appreciate and understand is that withholding love is only ever going to cause you pain. That doesn't mean, by the way, you have to go be their best friend. It doesn't mean you have to go be around them all day, every day. Talking about my stepfather, for example, there was a period where I basically said, you know what, I'm not going to let this bother me anymore. And I kind of shut it out, right? And that was a step in the right direction because I was at least just not giving it as much focus and attention and energy. But what I realized was there was another layer to the healing that had to occur. I had to stop withholding love from him. I had harbored so much resentment for him for years, and I didn't think it was harming me, but it was. And that's what I can tell you. Any hatred you are extending towards someone else, it's harming you, whether you know it or you don't. And the reason why is because, I'm not trying to get all spiritual and woo-woo on you, but your neighbor, your father, your mother, your sister, your whoever, they are you. Like, there is no true separation, right? Like, we all come from the same, like, life force, if you want to think of it that way, right? So if I hate this person over here, I'm hating a part of myself, right? We like to say separation equals suffering. And so you don't necessarily have to go be their best friend. You don't even necessarily have to go talk to them again. But you must decide that you're going to let go and you're going to forgive, if not for their sake, for your own sake. Because holding on and refusing to forgive, you may not think it's going to impact you, but it does. And then also it's impacting your kids, your spouse, the people around you. You holding on to that resentment creates a permanent sort of lock in your energy. The other people around you are affected by that energy. When you decide to release it and you get a deeper level of peace of mind, the people around you get to feel a deeper level of peace of mind. When you decide to forgive someone who harmed you, you're teaching that as an example and as a lesson to your kids, right? So this is how you break generational cycles. So if you think of what creates a generational cycle of trauma, what creates a generational cycle is one person holding on to limiting beliefs, it affecting their whole life, them raising kids holding on to those limiting beliefs. The kids then generate their limiting beliefs. Those kids then hold on to their limiting beliefs, and the cycle continues itself. The way you break the cycle is you have to create a new mindset. You have to create a new belief system. You have to value something above holding on to your pain and your self-righteousness. And you have to be able to recognize that forgiving somebody is not the same thing as saying that what they did was right. A lot of you are unwilling to forgive because you think, well, if I forgive them, it makes it permissible. It makes it okay. It means they can do it again. No, not true. This is what it means to establish a real boundary. The people who believe you can't forgive because you're making it okay and permissible are the same people who probably, like, if you're a person like that, you probably also have a really, really tough time setting boundaries with people. You have a tough time probably saying no to people. And what the deeper belief is that's causing that issue there is this person over here must act or do or say something in order for me to feel whole. So the reason why you're failing to forgive is either because you're expecting them to apologize, or you are expecting them to rectify what they did, or you believe unless they go back in time and change what they did, it's never going to be okay, therefore I'm never going to forgive them. But what you're doing is you're giving your power away to them. Some part of you is now making believe that they're the one in charge of your emotional health, your well-being. And that is not a good example to set for yourself for others, for your kids, whomever, right? You've got to decide to forgive for your sake, if for no one else's. And give love where you previously withheld it. If you've been blaming yourself and you've been withholding love from yourself, you must decide that self-love is now non-negotiable. You must decide that your sense of self-worth is no longer conditional or up for negotiation, right? You have to affirm and assert for yourself that just because that person did or said whatever they did, that has no reflection on you as an identity, as a person, as a soul. Remember, it's not about me. They were just simply reacting to their past, to their issues, to their triggers. You happened to get in their crossfire. That's all it was. Those were their patterns. You were the trigger for it. You were the cause of it, but not the source of the problem, right? So stop blaming yourself. Again, stop making it personal, if you remember the 3 Ps. Those are the steps. Those are the steps you have to do. Number 1, you must have a standard. You must say, I refuse to allow this to control me anymore. Number 2, you must derive an empowering meaning. Number 3, you must give love where it was previously withheld. And then number 4, and finally, you must decide to put your focus elsewhere. Okay, so there is a skill that we teach our clients. We call it therapeutic deletion. Okay, and the metaphor that I always like to use is, think about like if you ever have had a cut on the roof of your mouth. You know what I'm talking about? And you keep picking at it for days and days, and it's just such a tiny little cut. And you know that if you would just stop touching the damn thing, it would heal up fine and it would go away and you'd feel total relief. But you just keep probing at it and pushing at it and touching it. And what I have to let you understand and realize is, there comes a point where you just simply must decide, I'm not going to focus on this shit anymore. I'm not going to focus on this anymore, and I'm going to put my focus over here instead. Okay. And we call it therapeutic deletion because a lot of people get therapeutic deletion mixed up with repression, right? Repression is when you are blaming yourself, you are beating yourself up, you are failing to forgive, you have not derived an empowering meaning, and you're just choosing to ignore that. So it's like you've got this big bubbling pot, right? And you're just keeping the lid on it and you're hoping it doesn't boil over, but then it burns the shit out of you, right? That's not effective. That's not what we're talking about. That's repression. Okay, there's repression, and then there is processing and deletion. So that's what I'm an advocate for, processing and deletion. Processing means you go through the steps we talked about. You derive an empowering meaning. You blame effectively. You decide to forgive. You give love where it was previously withheld. That's the processing of it. And once you've done the processing properly, now the only thing left to do is to stop thinking about the shit. Because now there's no more value that's going to come from continuing to focus on it, right? And you continuing to focus on it and beating yourself up and doing that whole cycle is certainly not helping you at all. So you've got to process it and then say, cool, yep, that happened. That was back then. I'm done with that. I'm focusing elsewhere. There was a period of my life when I was the most depressed. The thing that landed me in the hospital when I was suicidal was all I was focused on, what other people were doing that was affecting me, what I disliked about my current situation, and what I felt had been taken away from me that I was owed. Those were the 3 things that were taking up 99% of my focus. And that made me feel completely disempowered, completely without options. And that's what happens that causes you to then feel suicidal. What I chose to do is to say, yes, my childhood was not the most pleasant in lots of places. However, I don't put my focus there. I don't continue to relive it like I used to. Instead, my focus goes on today, right here, right now. What can I do to make a difference? And if I am ever thinking about the pain of the past, I'm always thinking, how do I use the pain of the past to create a new belief system that will serve me and serve other people? How can I take what happened in the past and channel it into giving to other people who are in need? And that's what creates the ultimate healing experience. And that's what must be done. So hope you guys found this useful. If you would like some assistance doing this process and doing it properly, we are doing something a little unique and special, but only for the next couple of weeks. Basically what we are doing is we are taking our full 3-month program where I work with you one-on-one directly until we get your anxiety, depression, or any other mental health challenges dealt with. And we are doing it for a ridiculous 75% discount. Okay. And the reason why we're doing this is for two reasons. Number one, we've had many of you who have gotten so much value from our free content. We've had a consultation with you. We've talked with you about the program. You've basically said, oh my God, I absolutely know this is the right thing for me. I know I need to do this. I know this is the number one thing that needs to change in my life. Just the timing and the budget is literally the one thing holding me back. So we wanted to do this as a way to make sure that we can get these life-changing tools and the system that we've refined over 9 years into your hands, number one. And then number two, the trade-off, there's only one thing we're asking for in return, and that is that you only will be paying 25% of our regular fee, but what you will be willing to do is to provide an interview for us after the program, and then also allow us to use your story as a case study. Basically so that we can just bring that case study to the world and show it as an example of how the method works for your type of situation. So that way it can serve other people, it can help other people, and it can show other people what can be done. That's it. So we can go through the full details. If you would like to, if you're interested in that, option and you'd like to apply, just go ahead and type 75% off in the comments. Just put those, keywords there, 75% off. So you can type 75% off down below if you're interested in that. Otherwise, thanks for being with us. Talk to you soon. Bye.